Hey everybody, Renee LaValle McKenna from Open Door Growth, and I'm going to be meeting today with Cindy Darnell, and I haven't figured out how to do this and not look weird when I'm typing in her name, but I'm requesting her. We're going to be talking about erotic integrity and human erotic experience. Cindy is a couples counselor and a sex therapist, and she does somatic counseling and coaching with people. And I practice spiritual psychology, which is a blend of mind, body, spirit, and energetic healing. And love to talk about sexuality, love to have sex, love to talk about sex. And it's an issue, certainly, we all work with as humans, whether you identify as asexual, multisexual, or whatever your take on sexuality is. So I'm really, Cindy's got a lot of great things to say. She's a really dynamic person, and I'm really excited to talk to her. We're gonna actually be doing lives for the next couple weeks. It says Cindy is unable to join, so I'm gonna try to invite her again and see if we can get the show on the road. And so we're going to be talking the next couple of weeks about some different things to do with the human erotic experience, which is an enormous context to talk about. We're going to talk about the influence of porn. Hey, Cindy.
Hi there. I think I've got a dirty lens. Just let me have a little.
Clean yourself off over there. Hey,
I think.
Talk about dirty stuff. Right?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Good. Nice.
So I was just introducing you a little bit. I said you're a sex therapist and a couples counselor, and you do somatic counseling and coaching. Is that all sound correct?
Yeah, that's all good. I mean, I go by a lot of different titles depending on where, where my clients live, because there's different kind of names for what I do in different countries. So yeah, people know that I talk about sex and relationships for a living, and I help people with that. That's what they need to know.
Awesome. I get called different countries too, but that's a whole other conversation. So, I'm curious. I was looking a little bit over your stuff. We've talked a little bit. I want to talk about erotic integrity. I love integrity. You know, for myself, integrity is about alignment.
Yeah.
Physically, emotionally, energetically, spiritually, and how we orient ourselves in the world. And I feel like a really good way to think about things is like when I'm out of balance, where am I not in alignment with what feels true to me? So I thought about erotic integrity, and so I have to say about it.
Yeah. So for me, I mean, I think your description of it is really on the money, as it were. I would describe erotic integrity as being about knowing, first of all, you've got to know what your erotic values are. And what that means to me is, because it's a phrase that I kind of, made up. So other people may interpret these things differently, but to me it means knowing what matters to you in terms of sex and eroticism. So, for some people, pleasure might be an erotic value that they hold dear, or connection might be an erotic value that they hold dear, or having a transcendent experience might be something, or experiencing an orgasm, or maybe exploring power of surrendering or submitting, or power over another person consensually. So depending on what your erotic motivations are, depending on how you want to feel, what inspires you to engage sexually will inform how you're engaging with sex, engaging with the erotic. And this is true for people who are single, for people who are partnered, for people who are in open relationships, the whole spectrum. And so erotic integrity then is about, keeping your eye on what it is that motivates you sexually. Because if we're having sex and we don't really know why we're there, and we don't really know what we're doing, and we don't really know what the point of it is, if we're just sort of blindly going through it absent-mindedly, which can, as an example, it'll happen, when we're sort of driving somewhere. You can drive and it's the same route that you go every single day because it's how you get to the office or it's how you get to the supermarket or whatever. And we all do this. We all just kind of zone out and think, oh my gosh, are we here already? And all of a sudden 20 minutes has passed. And if I were to say to you, well, what were you thinking about for the last 20 minutes? You'd be like, I don't know, nothing, stuff. Or I was, listening to a podcast or listening to the radio or something. So being able to bring attention and awareness is a similar sort of value around maintaining erotic integrity, is really sort of, keeping your mind on the job, keeping yourself focused and disciplined enough that you actually respect what you're doing enough to put your whole self into it, not to be half-assed about it. Because I think a lot of the time, especially for people who are having sex that they would consider unsatisfying, as opposed to unsatisfactory. Unsatisfactory is a judgment word. Unsatisfying sex is subjective. It's how do I feel satisfied? If we're having sex that feels unsatisfying, one of the first things I talk about with folks is, well, where are you at when you're having sex? And what kind of sex are you having? What are you doing, actually? Because whether you're solo or partnered, if the sex you're having is not to your liking, it's very, very hard to then have an alignment with erotic integrity, because you're not actually enjoying what you're doing. And so you're out of integrity, not with anybody else necessarily, but just with yourself. So for me, that's what erotic integrity means.
So I love that, I use the word integrity a lot, and in all these different areas. And, like yourself, I really encourage people to go deeply and mindfully, not just in the present moment, but on this back end of like, why am I doing what I'm doing?
Yeah.
And, really, we don't even ask ourselves that question. Why am I married to this person? Why do I have the I have? Why do I live where I live? Why do I exercise? Why do I do these? Even if we're quote unquote taking care of ourselves, really look at the why. And the integrity for me is to get beyond, that mindless driving thing that we do of what was given to us by our culture and our family and our religion, or wherever we get, or our peers, wherever we gather it, and to do the work to really ask ourselves, what is my motivation for being there? And then for me, the secondary question is that actually the motivation that I want to have? Like, is that the motivation that I'm actually in alignment with? Like, I might be, fucking my husband because he's my husband, but is that actually the reason I want to be having sex with this? Or is it to include myself, all of who I am, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, socially, in the context of, it's like, really being mindful, not just in the moment, drop wood, carry water, but mindful about what and why and how.
Yes. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I think that's where a lot of people can find this very difficult and challenging, because sometimes, if we ask ourselves, why are we doing something, in a sex context, which is what we're talking about, and we realize that why we're doing something, having sex, for example, with our partner, is not for a reason that we're especially proud of, because it tells us that there's something uncomfortable. I'm doing it because I feel obliged to. I'm doing it because I feel, because if I don't, there's going to be trouble. Or if, I'm doing it because I'm scared that if I don't, I'm not going to feel loved, or love is going to be taken away from me. Then we actually have quite a different situation. We no longer have just a sex problem. We have a relational problem. And what goes on in sex is one thing, but also, sometimes we can't separate that from a relational context. Sometimes we can. With masturbation, for example, we can. With people who are having sort of casual partners, perhaps we can. But in partnerships that are longer term, there is often a real, intersection of what happens around sex and eroticism and what happens around relationships. And this is really true across genders and across orientations. There will be people who will experience this space between why they're having sex, why they think they should be having sex, why they think or what their ideal preference would be, and the degree to which they're comfortable communicating that with a partner who's willing to listen.
Well, before that, even comfortable admitting that to yourself.
Yeah.
Getting conscious about actually, the idea of what do I actually want? I was working with morning who even asking that question of like, what do you want?
Right.
She's never been asked that question in a way. Like it's always filtered through other things. And, so one of the things I'm really love to talk about, because it's a relatively new concept for me in the last few years, is to kind of, I don't want to say dissect, doesn't feel like the right word, but to observe the erotic experience, sex experience, love experience, and eroticism. And I love to see those as a triangle.
Mm-hmm.
And from my perspective, the sex is kind of more the physical engagement with the person. The is more the emotional, spiritual engagement of the person. And the erotic is kind of this mysterious, dynamic tension that is alive and interesting. And I'm curious, that's kind of my perspective on it. And I'm actually more interested in that mysterious erotic thing. Because that's where the meat is for me. But I'm curious how you kind of see those terminologies or experiences from people.
Yeah, I really make a distinction between sex and love, because there are people that we can love who we don't have sex with. There are people who we can have a really strong sexual connection with that we'd think, gosh, I would never have a relationship with that person at all, and certainly never have a joint bank account with them. No way, but the sexual connection's phenomenal. So I think, and the notion of sort of pairing up sex and love is actually a relatively new, very kind of Western value, that it's really only about 300 years old. So, and historically humans didn't pair sex and love together. Sex was a thing. Love was a thing. Romantic love is a whole other thing, because once upon a time, love used to mostly be talked about between a human and God, so it was having love for God. And then romantic love, somebody that you were attracted to, somebody that you had a heart connection with, who you may or may not be the person that you marry, because again, back in the day, marriage was about, assets, and it was very practical. And so when we look at the history of sex, love, relationships, and let's face it, money and power, we have to understand that what we conceptualize, the Hollywood narrative that we're spoon-fed about this is what sex, love, and relationships are supposed to be, is really BS. And for most people, they don't have a lived experience of that, because it's actually not how these things go together with any degree of ease. We kind of squish them together because we're expected to. And some people can make it work, but a lot have to find alternative pathways through that. Eroticism, I think, is a relationship with, with magic, a relationship with imagination, a relationship with play and fantasy and possibility. And it's, eroticism is almost akin to the sheer playfulness, I think, that we sometimes experience in childhood, that with the responsibilities and the burdens of adulthood get lost. And when we have the freedom to be able to tap into that playfulness again in adult play, and sometimes we can tap into that through sort of creative pursuits, improv classes and other kind of art-based projects. But being able to share that with another and sort of go on a very playful, transcendent journey, which most of us in childhood were able to do without having to think about it too much, being able to play, pirate ships, or being able to play, any game that we play where you take on a role, you take on a character, and you're less self-conscious, you're less concerned that you're unable to meet the grade, because it's just playtime and there are fewer consequences. But when we're adults having sexual intimate relationships with other adults, there are consequences. So we don't have the freedom that we had around playtime, like as younger people. So, you know, when it comes to sex being the physical, love being an emotional thing, which may or may not fit together with sex, and then eroticism, which definitely fits into sex, doesn't always fit into love. We are faced with, you know, having to have these inner reflections with ourselves and have these, I mean, really exploratory periods of self-inquiry about, well, you know, as an individual, how might those things fit together with me, even to actually be willing to tease them apart. Because when you look at how we're fed, you know, romance through Hollywood, and I'm thinking about romantic comedies, they don't go near that. None of them go near that. You know, that's way too deep. So,
well, you know, I had the privilege of having a couple children, and I had them a little bit later in life. And I do have to say, there tends to often be a very romantic approach that we have to childhood. And I worked at this, we were at a down and dirty co-op preschool. So I was there with the kids 3 days a week as like a parent teacher. And we had 90 families. There was a ton of kids. And I was really surprised at how challenging play was for a lot of children even.
mm-hmm.
About the age of 2 or 3, that like a lot of squishing, there's a lot of, is this okay? You know, that starts and continues on, that there's the idealization that we have, even about our relationship with what I call joy. I didn't make up that. Mm-hmm. And I love what you said about eroticism and playfulness, because I think a really underrated source of power in the world is joy, in and out. And that's, but being able to have that openness that, you know, you could see as spiritual, it can be physical, it can be, to be able to play is actually not that easy for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like what it even, you know, there's a mystery of play that in childhood, I think that is probably equal to the mystery of eroticism, of like where, because there is a transpersonal aspect of it, and also a personal aspect of it. Although it doesn't always have to engage other people either. Like you know, masturbatory eroticism of people within, you know, and how do I, again, getting conscious about that, and can that be a source of joy and power that may be untapped? What happens when people don't have that in their life?
Right. And I mean, I think sex for a lot of people is not especially joyful, certainly not in the beginning. Sometimes you have to, you know, move through a lot of layers of shame and discomfort to get to the joy. And, you know, and that's, I think, where I can be a little bit critical of the oversimplification of sex positive culture to say, you know, that sex is about, you know, feeling blissful all the time. Sex is about having mind-blowing orgasms. I mean, yes, it is. It is about that for some people some of the time. But the journey to get there can be really quite arduous and confronting. But I think it's a journey that's absolutely worth having, because your relationship to your body, your relationship to your physical capacity to feel stuff, from pleasure through to, you know, the torment of you know, unresolved, complicated emotions, unresolved feelings that are residual from the past, that may or may not actually have anything to do with sex, but will manifest in your sex life. Even if they've got nothing to do with sex, they will get bogged in there, they will get stuck there. And, you know, looking at it through perhaps a more spiritual lens, a more tantric lens of things getting stuck, perhaps only in the lower chakras, not being able to move up to other parts. Or conversely, what I see in a lot of New Age communities is there's a lot of activity happening up here and there's no grounding. There's just nothing going on downstairs. And I'm like, how are you going to have one of these amazing orgasms that you're talking about when, you know, the entire basement is blown out? There's just nothing there. So So it's really about recognizing that sex is really extremely multidimensional. And if you're only going for the joy aspect, if you only want to feel so-called positive emotions, then you're going to have a really hard time with sex, because sex is about the whole lot. It's about life, death, rebirth, decay. The whole gamut is what sex offers us. And I wonder if in a way that's why it's become so taboo. That's why so many, religions sort of warn against it and say don't go near it, because something bad might happen, because it will open you up to parts of yourself that perhaps you don't want to see. It will open you up to parts of the human condition that are confronting and challenging. But that's where the healing is. That's where the growth is. That's actually where the pleasure is, because when you can move through it, not around it, not over the top of it, no spiritual bypassing, get down and dirty and live with this. To me, that's what sexual liberation is. When you're willing to embrace sex for everything it has to offer you, then that actually can become quite euphoric.
Well, that's one of the thing I love about personal growth work and about being a human, and here we are being human, is that it's almost like the DNA in our cells. Like every cell holds the DNA for the whole structure. And
Yeah.
if we move deeply really into any aspect of our life, it's going to bring us to all those places.
Right.
And I think, like you said, and there's some that we can kind of block it off. And I think, sexuality does open up, in some ways, all of those aspects.
Yes.
Connected into all of those more powerfully than most of the others might be. We're less able to block it off unless we block it off completely if we go deep into it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we're going to see parts of ourselves and parts of another person and confront aspects that. That's why I always encourage people to be in a relationship, because you're going to see stuff about, you're all good when I'm alone and I'm like all got it together and my little anorexic self, and then you get in a relationship and whoa.
Yeah. Well, and that's where it becomes a whole other thing, And I think, for some people, the confronting element of relationship, or sometimes the burdened element of relationship, and the real labor of doing the work to be able to allow yourself to see yourself through the eyes of another person is not necessarily something that everybody is up for. That said, that level of intimacy can sometimes be a passion killer. Sometimes we don't want to have sex with people who've seen us at our worst, because that destroys the fantasy, that destroys the game. So it's really, really a very complicated thing. And there is no right path, So for folks who are listening and participating in this, to think that, I have any advice about the one true way to do it, I don't. And I guess that is my one true way, is that there is not one true way,
So how can people get in touch with you, Cindy?
So through my website, which you said you were having trouble getting on my website at the moment.
It was weird. Look at it on your phone. It was great on the computer, but on the phone it was weird. It was just staying. I could see stuff underneath, but I couldn't actually get to the content.
Weird. Okay, I'll talk to very important people about that. But my website is cindydarnell.com, CYNDIDARNELL.com. And really, because we're on Instagram, just go to my bio and click the link, and it'll take you to all of the stuff. And if you're having trouble with mobile, I'll see if I can get that sorted out. I think it's working, but yeah, maybe it's different phones are doing weird stuff. So yeah, that's how people can find me.
Okay, great. So Cindy, thanks so much for talking. You can find me, ReneeMcKenna.com, or through Open Door Growth. And we're going to continue the conversation in the weeks to come. So
yeah, great. Every Friday at 3 Eastern.
Friday at 3 Eastern, noon Pacific.
Great.
Cindy, thanks so much. Have a great day.
You're welcome. Thank you. Good to see you again.
Bye now.